welcome back to Hannity as we continue with former Defense Secretary Robert Gates. All right, you say in the book, I think, about Joe Biden, I think he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy, national security issue over the past 4 decades, which I think is pretty much probably right. But you also talk about him undermining. You felt that he was creating distrust between President Obama and the military.
I did. He, as early as him coming back from an early trip to Iraq, and when we were talking about the first addition of troops in February and March of 2009, he told the press on his plane that he wasn't going to let the military bully the president into making a premature decision. And I think that he was, based on everything I heard from a variety of people in the White House, he was always kind of going at the president and goading him that you can't trust these guys. They're going to jam you. They're going to box you in. They're going to game you, and so on.
Yeah. Do you think he hurts the president in that sense, that he gave him bad counsel?
Well, I certainly think in terms of the relationship with the military, it wasn't helpful. Now, I do say in the book, the military, I think some of the senior military spoke out publicly too often and outside of, for example, congressional testimony where they're supposed to speak out on these issues. And I think that in speaking out and in ways that limited the president's options potentially or put pressure on him, they gave some cause for people in the White House to be suspicious. But I think it was actually both sides doing things. And as I said earlier, I don't think there was ever any orchestrated effort to try and pressure the president. There was no doubt where the military stood, but I think the speaking out publicly about it did help foster that distrust. But there were clearly people inside the White House, and I think led by the vice president, who were stoking that fire.
No. You said, maybe you saved your kindest words for Congress. You said what you saw there up close is truly ugly. Most of Congress is uncivil, incompetent at fulfilling their basic constitutional responsibilities like appropriations. They're micromanagers, they're parochial, hypocritical, egotistical, thin-skinned, and prone to put self and re-election before country. That I thought was particularly hard, that they put their own ambition before their country. That's your experience with them?
That was my experience, yes.
Is that both sides of the aisle?
Whether it's, yes, and whether it's supporting weapon systems or expenditures that are no longer necessary or could be better used for other things, opposing shutting down or saving money by shutting down something in their district or state, or and we've talked about it previously, I believe that a great deal of the opposition to the surge was political. And so that gave me a lot of trouble. As Secretary of Defense, I prepared 5 budgets, and not once did I have an appropriations bill at the beginning of the fiscal year. And fighting 2 wars, we were being dribbled out money 2 and 3 months at a time to sustain it. And then they complain about how the Department of Defense is poorly managed.
You talk about the issue of war in general, and my own position has shifted on this a little bit. You say it's a lot easier to get into than to get out of. Too many ideologues, I would agree with that. In this day and age of instantaneous media, it seems to me that we're at a point in this country that if a war gets politicized, we're almost incapable then of accomplishing the mission of winning it. And if we're not about winning, like that's what bothered me about what you said about the president. He thought he was going to lose. If we're not about winning the war, I don't think we should put one American soldier in harm's way. Am I wrong, or is there a nuanced answer to that?
No, and what I believe is that we make a lot of wrong assumptions about war, and too often the questions about what happens if those assumptions are wrong are never asked. For example, we went into both Iraq and Afghanistan believing that these would be short wars. The American people are fine with a war like the first Gulf War that lasts 100 hours. with a couple of months of bombing beforehand. But any president that puts the United States, puts American military into a situation where we're using force without clear objectives, without clear guidelines in terms of what do we hope to achieve here, and what are our benchmarks in terms of whether we're being successful. When the first President Bush launched the Gulf War, the only time in my experience he actually put down on a piece of paper what our war aims were, and we would stop when we achieved those aims.
See,
and we need clarity from our political leaders, from presidents, when we do use military force, so that we don't get sucked into long, grinding conflicts like we face both in Afghanistan and Iraq, and where you end up with ambiguous outcomes.
This will be my last question, because we kind of come full circle here. Because based on what you're saying and what you say about war, and you even kind of mock a little bit Joe Biden, the idea that we can just use drones and win wars, that we're not there yet. Maybe one day we'll be there, but that's not reality right now, that you can win a war that way. But based on what you're saying, when you go back to the president, you were convinced he didn't think we can win it, he didn't believe in it, he didn't think it was his war. I don't know if I could have served under a president that wasn't convinced he was going to win that war and do everything possible to win.
Well, and that's I think the distinction that I would draw. The president did have reservations whether we could achieve our objectives, I think, but he did make the decisions that I felt were important that would enable us to be successful in accomplishing the mission in Afghanistan.
Even though he wasn't convinced they could win. And, you know, when we started the segment out here earlier, you know, we played segments of the president and what he was saying. You know, he didn't believe in it. You didn't feel he believed in it.
Well, as I say, I think he believed in it when he made the decisions. I think he continued to have enough confidence that he made the decisions to keep supporting the troops in Afghanistan despite whatever reservations he might have had.
But even though it was only about 40% less than what the commanders thought was necessary to win the war?
You know, the truth of the matter is, Sean,
or risk failure?
The truth of the matter is we couldn't have come up with 80,000 troops even if he had approved that number. And I think that the military, including General Petraeus and General McChrystal, came to accept that the numbers that they had been given would enable them to accomplish the objective.
I hope in the future that people pay attention. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. And the worst part to me that happened in all this, we had a lot of kids that lost their legs, a lot of families that lost their sons and daughters. And I don't think the country was as committed to these battles as it should have been. Am I wrong?
One of the challenges for a democracy is that when wars drag on, political and public support tends to evaporate. And so we have to be more careful about when we engage our military force so that when we do, we can accomplish our objective fairly quickly and then come home.
All right. Well, there's no doubt your commitment for the troops. What I learned about you was fascinating. Thank you for being with us.